Sabbe satta bhavantu sukhitatta bhavantu sukhitatta.
Hello, I'm Dave Jacobson, and I'm here with the fourth installment of our series on Nibbana, the secret treasure of the Buddhas. I want to continue talking about name and form. This is a very important topic. It's hard to overstress how important it is. And today I want to talk specifically about how name and form is used in I-making and mind-making. Now, we should understand, from the Buddha's point of view, there is no such thing as a self. Well, there is a thing called self, but there isn't an ego as a dhamma, as a reality, as a natural occurrence. It's something that we create, that we fabricate, that we make. And how do we make it? Out of name and form. I want to show you a graphic representation of the process of I-making and mind-making. Actually, it should be mind-making and I-making, because as we will see, we fabricate the I by first designating things as mine. So let's take a look at this. This is drawn from the Mula-pariyaya Sutta, which I very highly recommend that you read. And I also recommend that you read the documentation that goes along with this, because it explains everything in much more detail. Here's the link. So let's take a look at the process of I-making, the root structure, as it's called. This is the root structure of the mind. So what happens at first? We see something. Let's say we see a car. Now, this is direct or immediate experience. And this is the foundation of all experience, the direct sensory inputs. Now, of course, even the direct sensory inputs are actually symbols. They are not the things that they represent, but they are a representation created by the senses that limits the amount of information flowing into the mind so that we can handle it, so that we can deal with it. So then once the object has been perceived, let's say I see a car. That means the light impinges on my eye, it's transmitted by the optic nerves to the visual cortex, and the visual cortex processes it into a foreground and background representation so I can see the car as a separate object from what's behind it. Then what happens? Recognition. We see X as X. We see the car as a car. There is a hardwired association in our brain, drawn from experience of form, that recognizes this as a car. Now, the minute we do that, it becomes not a direct experience, but a reflective experience. In other words, there's a reflex, a hard-coded response in the brain that sees the car and decodes this into, that's a car. Now what have we done? We have applied a label or a tag to that perception, to that consciousness of a car. And now we're not only dealing with the perception itself, but we're also dealing with the label or tag as a representative, as a pointer to that information. For those of you who are familiar with computer programming, a tag is like a pointer. So, what do we do then? We conceive X. To conceive means to create something that is not there in the original. In other words, the car doesn't know that it's a car. Only we have that knowledge, that recognition, that consciousness, due to the fact that we're conscious entities. That's the difference between our perception and the car itself. We know that it's a car. How do we know that? Because we have many experiences previously of cars in various aspects. So it's very easy for us to recognize and label it. So now we are conceiving something in this car. What is it that we're conceiving? Well, besides the fact that it's a car, We're conceiving I and mine. If we see the car and we like it, we want to make it ours. Well, how do we do that? We conceive in X. We conceive in the car. In other words, we put our I in the car. This is sometimes called projection or identification. That, oh, I am in the car. Maybe I see the car as something desirable or undesirable. It doesn't matter. Either way, I now have a relationship, an I-thou relationship, a subject-object relationship with this car, which didn't exist in the original perception. So we're conceiving it. We're making it up, fabricating it. So now what? Then we conceive from X. We conceive ourself from the car. Maybe we imagine ourselves sitting in the car, driving along, and everyone is admiring our nice car. Oh, and we must be such a great person because we have such a nice car, right? Or maybe I see an old junky car and I look at the car. I imagine myself owning that car and I go, no, I don't want that car. Either way, it involves conceiving from the car, from the point of view of the object back towards the subject. A kind of reverse flow. It's very interesting. You'll see why. And then we come to the conclusion, X is for me. The car is for me. Either this is my car, I want it, or this is my car, I don't want it, or this is my car and I don't care. Depending on the feeling that we get from that car, whether it's pleasurable, displeasurable, or neither. And then finally, we rejoice in X. We rejoice in the car. I'm so glad I got this car. Now this car is mine. Okay? And, or if we don't like the car, we say, oh, phew, I'm so glad that's not my car. And if we don't care, we just don't care. It's neutral. Throw it in the trash. So, this is the ontic process. Why is it called ontic process? Because it's an experience. It's something we experience all the time. And if you observe yourself, there's no need to prove this, you know. You just observe yourself and see it happening. You know, you can't deny that this is what happens. Now, what is particularly strange about this process is that in the beginning, there is no I involved. There's only the object. I perceive a car. And we bring I and mine into it by projection, by conception, by conceiving a concept of my car and putting the I in the car. This is I car. I identify with the car. And then we conceive ourselves in the car, and so on, all the rest of the stages. Where did this I come from? We make up the story that this I was pre-existing. It was already there. And I just came in contact with this car. I just saw this car. And I like it, or I didn't like it, or whatever my story is. But actually, the I does not exist in the original perception, in the original contact of the senses with the car. So where does the I come from? It's conceived. It's projected. It's identified with the car. So by making an object mine, quote unquote, we actually justify the existence of an I. Well, that's my car, and my camera, and my room, and my computer, and so on. So then I must exist, right? Well, take a look for this I. Where is it? Can you show it to me? Can you even show it to yourself? Take a good look for it. Sit down someday in a quiet room all by yourself and just look for I. You won't find anything that resembles an I. What you'll find is many, many, many impressions where you have conceived in those impressions the concept of I, the concept of mine. This is called acquisition. I'm taking something in the world and I'm making it mine. And by making it mine, I am reassuring myself that I exist. But actually, if I go looking for I can't find it. So this is how we delude ourselves into thinking I am. Descartes is famous for saying, I think, therefore I am. And that's true in the sense that before you start thinking about it, there is no I. You have to think about it. You have to project. You have to conceive the concept of I in order to be, in order for I to am. So what we have here is actually a way of generating a story. And we do this many, many times a second with each impression that comes in. Oh, this is my window. This is my sky. This is my tree. This is my wind. This is my house. This is my this, that, the other thing. On and on and on. And so, just like a movie, this video, for example, is simply a bunch of still frames projected at 24 or 30 frames a second or whatever it is. And the mind then merges these together into a continuous stream, and it appears that there's motion. But actually there is no motion. So similarly, the mind stitches together all of these individual impressions into the illusion that there is this I. But actually there's no I. This is the first thing you need to learn and realize if you're going to understand and benefit from the Buddha's teaching. So let's go on. The definition of nāma and rupa given by Venerable Sāriputta is feeling, perception, intention, contact, attention. This, friend, is called name. The four great primaries and form dependent on the four great primaries. This, friend, is called form. So this is name and this is form. This, friend, is called name and form. Nāma rupa. Okay? So the act of assigning a symbol or a tag to a perception is only the final end, the final stage of the process of giving a name to something. Before that we have feeling, perception, intention, contact, and attention. These are the atomic structure, if you will, of the perception of objects. So objects by themselves are just whatever they are. But when we put together all these different impressions related to that particular object and then bundle them into what might be called a gestalt in psychology, and then attach a tag, a symbol, a name, a word, that is the process of name making. Okay, so we not only have I making and mind making, we have name making, and we also have form making, where we take the four great elements, earth, water, fire, air, and we stitch those impressions together into our idea of an object. Well, previous to that, the object doesn't exist. The object just is. Nature just is doing whatever it's doing. Objects come into being and they go out of being. So the part that we play is that we consolidate our impressions, our sense contacts with a particular thing. And then we give it a name as well. And we call this form. Now, for example, this pair of glasses. What is it that allows us to call this a pair of glasses? Well, it's got some glass lenses, you know, and it's got some earpieces and a frame that fits on my nose and helps me to see better. But how do I know these are a pair of glasses? Well, because they have a certain configuration of elements: opaque and transparent, curved and straight, hard and soft. Okay? It's primarily earth. How can I tell? By the resistance. If it was water or air, it wouldn't have so much resistance. My hand would just pass through it. But because it is earth, primarily transparent and opaque and shaped into a certain form, it has a particular utility that I call a pair of glasses. So let's say it breaks. Let's say I drop it on the floor. The glass shatters. Is it now a pair of glasses? No. It's a piece of junk. I throw it in the garbage. Why? Because it no longer performs the function of a pair of glasses. So what we call an object is actually a particular kind of behavior, a particular kind of resistance. And a particular object may have several different types of resistance, like this body. This body is soft when you first start to squeeze it. It has a resistance that's almost watery. And then if you squeeze it hard, you find there's a solid core, like earth. See, and those are called bones. So if you look into anything, any object is a collection of impressions that we consolidate and add a tag to, give a name to, and now we call it a thing. But a thing is actually simply a concept. We can have concepts that are correct, that match actual things in the world, and we can have concepts that are incorrect, that don't match any particular thing. So the concepts that match real things are called Dhamma, that which is. And the concepts that match unreal things, imaginary things, are called Adhamma, or that which is not. So the ego, the mind, the self, the soul, all these things are actually adhammas. They don't really exist. They are simply concepts, simply conceits, or things that we wish into existence, that we will into existence, even though they're not really there. So you could say, well, the thought is really there, the thought of I, or the thought of a particular feeling or object is certainly there. And yes, that is a Dhamma. But let's be real. It's not one of the four elements. It's not earth, water, air, or fire. It's not even space. It's not even emptiness. It's not. When we see this, that most of the things that we live around and work with and so on are simply abstractions, simply names, just a name space, which amalgamates or groups together several different impressions from different senses and so on. When we start to see this, then we understand the Vedic expression that we live in the world of names. Try being silent for 1, 2, 3 days. I have a good opportunity coming up. All my friends are leaving for various festivals and things like that. I'm going to be here for 3 or 4 days all by myself. So except for these videos, I plan to make several videos during that time. It's a great chance. But otherwise I'm going to be silent. There's no need to speak. There was no one to hear. So I'm going to be silent, and it's a great opportunity to look deep into these things. So take some time to be silent and let your mind settle. And you'll find, especially when you come back into the association of other people, how much of our reality is simply based on names, is simply based on tags, semantic identifiers, whatever you want to call them. They are simply labels for our experience that are very convenient. Language is extremely convenient because we can talk about things even that aren't here. Well, the problem is we can even talk about things that don't really exist at all, like I and you and we and them and countries and religions and philosophies and all kinds of abstractions that have no concrete existence whatsoever. The most we can say is that these things are agreements. They're consensus realities. You agree that you have an I agree that I have an I, and then we both call each other you. See, this is how language develops. Language is for the convenience of putujanas, or those who are uninstructed in the Buddha's teaching. Those who are instructed have direct experience that there is no such thing as I, mine, you, yours, theirs, and so on. These are simply constructions, abstractions, and the problem is, of course, that they get in the way of our perception of reality, that we don't see the real world. Instead, we only see objects, things, and events that are largely composed of symbols, terms, and identifiers. Therefore, it is said that nāma rupa, name and form, rule everything. Everyone has come under the sway of name and form. And because they don't understand that name and form is simply concept, therefore they come under the control of death, because birth, death, all these things are simply concepts. They are events that we construct out of an assembly of different impressions, different contacts of the senses, different stages of consciousness, and so on. So if you've been through our previous series, Existential Ambiguity, especially the 3rd chapter, you're already familiar with these concepts. But if not, if it seems unfamiliar or unclear to you, you should go back and watch those videos again and try to define these terms clearly for yourself. Look them up in the dictionary and so on, so that this vague terminology is not going to hold you back, but you have a clear, crisp understanding of all these terms. And then we can go on into the deeper understanding of the subject of Nibbana.
Sabbe satta bhavantu sukhitatta bhavantu sukhitatta.